Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Ian Morris, and I'm the Electoral Area Director for Cowichan Lake South Scotts Falls. I will be chairing the regular Electoral Area Services Committee meeting of Wednesday, October 16th, 2024. I'd like to begin by, start with that I'd like to recognize the CVRD is on the unceded territories of the Cowichan, Malahat, Subasset, Halalt, Penelakut, Staminas, Layaxan, Pakwachan, Titi Dot, and Pachi Dot nations who've walked gently here for thousands of years. I'd like to note too that if those people around the room and in the gallery, if you have electronic devices, that you have put them on silent or mute or turn them off. Unlike my colleague from Committee of the Whole, I don't find people when their phone goes off, but it's nice to not have the interruptions. Just note today we are implementing some procedures around some of the new legislation that we're bound to follow, and we might have some new language in here today that you may not have heard before. So as I say, we're going to take it slowly and cautiously and patiently, and we will proceed and get through a fairly lengthy agenda today. With that, I'd like to welcome Director McClinton, who is online, and I believe Director Deck is joining us remotely as well. And Director Martman's camera is off, but he's in the room too. So with that, Ms. Boyd, what have you got for us today?
Thank you, Chair. May I please have an approval of the agenda?
Moved and seconded. Any discussion? Seeing none, all those in favor? Any opposed? None opposed. The motion carries. Ms. Boyd.
Thank you, Chair. Thank you, Chair. We have a recommendation that the minutes of Special Electoral Area Service Committee meeting of October 2nd, 2024 be adopted.
We have a mover. Seconder. Any discussion on that item? Seeing none, call the question. All in favor? Any opposed? None opposed. The motion carries. Next item, Ms. Boyd.
M2, that the minutes of the Electoral Area Services Committee meeting of October 2nd be adopted.
Moved, seconded. Any discussion? Seeing none, all those in favor? Any opposed? None opposed. The motion carries. Next item, Ms. Boyd.
Thank you, Chair. No business arising from the minutes. We move to the public input period.
Yes, please.
Thank you. The public input period is to offer the public an opportunity to comment on agenda items before the committee considers the item. The public input period procedure policy allows for an allotment of 15 minutes where the speaker is welcome to comment on any items on the agenda up to a maximum of 3 minutes. This excludes items that are or have been subject to a public hearing. Input from the community is valued and appreciated. We request that input is presented in a friendly and respectful manner. Your cooperation in maintaining a safe, respectful, and orderly environment is greatly appreciated.
And I think now is when we need the explanation as to items that will not be or cannot be commented on in regards to public input. Would you help me with that, Ms. Boyd?
Thank you, Chair. We have R4. It's not subject to public input per the Local Government Act. Section 464(3) prohibits public hearings as well as the public input.
Thank you. With that, I would invite any members of the public that would like to provide input to the committee on items on our agenda today, excluding, as noted, R4. And now would be your opportunity. It's a 15-minute session with 3 minutes a crack, I think. I'd like to invite anyone that would like to provide input. Seeing no one coming forward to the lectern, Ms. Boyd, next item on the agenda.
Thank you, Chair. We have no delegation scheduled. We'll move to correspondence. We have a grant and aid that it be recommended to the board that a grant and aid Electoral Area C, Cobble Hill, in the amount of $500 be provided to the Malahat District Legion Branch 134 to support veterans who are in need.
Moved by Director Wilson, seconded by Director Abbott. Director Wilson.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. You'll note that it says on there that support is provided through the Legion Poppy Fund. This particular grant is so we can provide immediate aid to any veterans in need in our area without having to go through a long process. So basically, that's the explanation of why I'm granting this one.
Thank you. Any discussion? Seeing none, all those in favor? Any opposed? None opposed, the motion carries. That will be going to our next board meeting on what day, Ms. Boyd? On October 30th. So recommendations from today's committee meeting will go to the next board meeting, which is, as I understand now, October 30th. Next item, Ms. Boyd.
Thank you, Chair. We have a recommendation that be recommended to the board, a grant and aid Electoral Area C, Cobble Hill, in the amount of $2,000 be provided to the Cowichan Valley Primary Care Society to support startup funds for the nonprofit society.
Moved by Director Wilson, seconded by Director Segal. Director Wilson, would you like to comment on
Yes,
this
sorry
item?
to keep butting in here. This particular one, I'm kind of wishing that we hadn't had an election right now, because this should have come forward through our ministry at one time. We're still hoping that it will come forward. This is just to keep things going until the governance of this province is finally in place. Anyone else feels like giving some more money, please step forward, do it. Thank you very much.
Seeing no other comments, all those in favor? Any opposed? None opposed, the motion carries. Next item, Ms. Boyd.
Thank you, Chair. That it be recommended to the board that a grant and aid Electoral Area E, Cowichan Station, Satlam, Glenora, in the amount of $7,000 be provided to the Ida Wegman Association of BC, Glenora Farm, to support the in-farm recreation program's body weight exercise equipment.
Moved by Director Nicholson, seconded by Director Segal. Any discussion on this item? Director Nicholson.
I would just say if folks have not had an opportunity to go out to the Glenora Farm when they're hosting one of their wonderful events, I believe they have one at Christmas time, so look for that coming up. It's an amazing place, and what I really appreciate about it is they do everything that they can to be sustainable. They grow a lot of their own food, and actually more food than they use, and it's a really amazing place.
Thank you, Director Nicholson. Seeing no hands, call a question. All those in favor? Any opposed? None opposed, the motion carries. Next item, Ms. Boyd.
No information reports. We will move to R1. Report from the Development Services Division regarding a request for concurrence renewal telecommunications tower at 1345 Fisher Road, PID 031-891-861.
Do we have staff introducing this? Mr. Buchan.
Good afternoon. And if we could advance to the maps, please. Thank you. The subject property is 1345 Fisher Road, located in Electoral Area C. Next slide, please. This application is to reintroduce a request from Rogers Communications for a proposed telecommunications tower. There was previously a letter of concurrence that was issued by the CVRD, but that has since expired. Next slide, please. So the previous letter that was issued was in 2021, and the proposal is identical. While the board resolution did not include an expiry, the Innovation, Science and Economic Development Canada policy stipulates that letters of concurrence that are older than 3 years must be renewed. Next slide, please. Again, the proposal remains the same, which is to install the 50-meter cell tower with fencing at its base, 9 meters off the property line. Next slide, please. Staff have recommended that the board reissue a letter of concurrence with the same conditions as the 2021 letter. The CVRD's telecommunication antenna structures policy does not contemplate renewal requests. So the current proposal remains the same and unchanged from what was previously approved, and that is the staff recommendation. I'm here for questions. The agent unfortunately can't be with us today due to an illness, so if the board feels that it's necessary to ask questions, they can be available at a future meeting if this is deferred.
Thank you, Mr. Buchan. This, I'm hoping, might be a fairly straightforward item. Any questions for staff on this particular item? Director Abbott.
Thank you, Chair. Just clarification, Mr. Buchan. I trust Rogers does not have to meet the new structures policy that we created in 2023.
Through the chair, yes, so the comment was that this current policy in 2023 doesn't contemplate these types of renewals, and we are simply suggesting that the previous resolution be upheld.
Director Wilson.
Yes, unless there was power available as a drop down from telephone poles.
Somebody needs to be muted. It's not me this time. Got that? Yeah. Thank you. Director Wilson.
Yeah, I move the recommendation.
Do we have a seconder? Moved and seconded. Any discussion on this item? Seeing none, all those in favor? Any opposed? Unopposed, the motion carries. Again, that'll go to the October 30th board meeting. Ms. Boyd.
Thank you, Chair. R2, verbal report from the Fire Rescue Services regarding the new Fire Safety Acts. There's a presentation from Mr. Gordon Anderson.
Mr. Elzinga, welcome.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and through the electoral area directors, this report is regarding the update to the Fire Safety Act. We do have a PowerPoint presentation for you. Gordon Anderson is going to be presenting. Also want to recognize Glenn Cooper, the Fire Rescue Services Manager. Currently, for support as well as Mr. Postings and myself on any questions, this is a PowerPoint for information. We anticipate a report coming forward to the board meeting October 30th.
Thank you and welcome.
Thank you to the chair and the directors for the opportunity to present this to you today. And just get our slides up here. Okay, thank you. Yes, thank you. So the purpose of this presentation is just to give you a really brief overview of the change in legislation that occurred back on August the 1st of this year. And that was the introduction of the new Fire Safety Act replacing the Fire Services Act. By way of background for myself, I was most recently the acting Fire Services Manager for the CBRD for a number of months when there was a transition in the permanent staff, and Mr. Cooper has taken over that role from me in the temporary capacity. In my previous role, I was the Fire Commissioner for the province from 2014 to 2019, and I was the one behind the crafting and implementation, or bringing into effect, if you will, of the new Fire Safety Act. So I've got a fair background in terms of the construct of it and all the bits and pieces that you may have questions on, I hope. With respect to, there we go. With respect to the Act itself, as I mentioned, it was passed back in 2016 and got royal assent, but was not brought into force, and it was brought into force by government on August 1st of this year. The regulations to the Act are still forthcoming. They have some of the regulations so far that have actually come into effect, the examples of that being the fire code being adopted as one of the regulations. Some of the training standards that are referenced in the Act are also been brought into play, and certain of the penalty limits that are part of the enforcement or compliant portion of the Act. Those have also been subject to regulations that have come out, but there will be some additional regulations still to follow. The LAFC program, that was the local assistant to the fire commissioner. So typically in a municipality, that would be the fire chief and some of the officers that get appointed with those powers. Outside of a municipality, the regional district would request the fire commissioner to make that appointment, which then gave the person with the LAFC title the powers and ability to do things like inspections and fire investigations and so on. So as of August 1st, those powers disappeared. There was some misunderstanding, I think, when it first came out, because the staff had indicated that there was an extension into October for all the existing LAFCs to continue in that role and capacity, when in fact, when the legislation was repealed and replaced, all of that disappeared. So that leads to some of the stuff we're going to talk about here very briefly about the appointments that need to be made as a result of the Act coming in. The powers that are done pursuant to your bylaws always reference the existing legislation. In that case was the Fire Services Act. With the Act disappearing and the new Fire Safety Act coming in, there's a need now for all of the fire establishment bylaws and bylaws relating to the fire powers from that act have to be redone because all the references are no longer valid. So that is also another thing that we'll talk about at the end here in terms of what needs to be occurring. The inspection investigation powers. So fire departments have the ability to do fire inspections. In municipalities, there's a requirement for fire inspections and a system of them to be done. I won't delve into that because that's not relevant here. For regional districts, there is no actual statutory requirement to do fire inspections. However, the Act empowers the regional districts to use those powers by virtue of people being appointed as inspectors and investigators. So in the case of the regional district, you'll have the ability to do those things if you choose to, but there's not a statutory requirement to follow through on the inspection side. A little bit different on the investigations, and I'll touch on that. So this is one of the things that's sort of a little bit more urgent. I was talking to Mr. Cooper with regards to where the RD is at with its appointments. So I've got a bit of an idea of what the progress, and I understand is coming up at an upcoming meeting to do the appointments, which will meet the statutory obligation of the RD to have appointed people in those capacities. The secondary question to that will be, how do you effectively carry out the actions, if you will, that are associated to those appointments, but that can be dealt with in a separate manner. The first thing is the statutory requirement being met. The secondary is to how do you then carry it out. And that'll be a subject, I think, to the staff report, which I understand will be following as well. The appointments of the inspectors and investigators. So with respect to the regional district, all of the regional district is affected by this. In other words, you need somebody who has power to do inspections where you choose to or where you need to throughout the RD, which encompasses a variety of different areas, one of which is the improvement districts. The improvement districts, not being a local form of local government, do not have this power bestowed on them like an RD does. So it's the regional district that'll actually do the appointments. And what's recommended is that you simply confer with the fire departments of those improvement districts with respect to finding out who they would put forward as somebody qualified to do those roles, and then make the appointments accordingly. So there's a path forward to do that respects their jurisdiction that they have and the services they provide, but it's the regional district's responsibility to make sure that their areas are covered off by those appointments. With respect to the appointment of fire investigators, I mentioned it's slightly different. Fire investigations, there's always been a requirement for all fires in the province to be investigated and reported to the Office of the Fire Commissioner. With respect to regional districts, there are areas within the regional district that have no LAFCs appointed in the past. In other words, usually very rural areas where there's little or no population are typical examples. Any area that has a fire department would have a LAFC appointment would have been made, and other areas that have requested it would also have them. And with that appointment, there was an automatic statutory requirement to do the fire investigation and reporting function. So what the Act does now is simply say that that exists throughout the whole of the RD, not just areas that had those appointments. So that's the one slight change that the legislation brings in. Again, not diving down the rabbit hole of how you make that happen. That'll be information that follows. But just to be aware that that investigation requirement does exist. One quick note at the bottom, you'll notice there it says that fire investigation reports for all fires. Again, we get some confusion in the past regarding what has to be reported and not reported. If there's any death, any injuries, or any property damage, and there's very, very limited exceptions to that. An exception to that might be somebody had a turkey burn in the oven and it's contained within the oven. That would not be considered a reportable fire. But beyond that, if you had something happen in your kitchen and you had fire and there was damage, property damage, that's something that would be investigated and also reported. Keeping in mind, investigations are not necessarily going to be something that's extensive and huge and something that's very simple. It could be a matter of simply going there, getting the information, and filing the report from the investigator point of view. So the actions that are going to be required, mentioned at the start there that the appointment of investigators and inspectors, the urgency to this because it's a statutory requirement. Again, you can only move as fast as your processes allow, and you're in the process now of finding those statutory appointments to satisfy that, and the practical aspects will follow. All of your powers and authorities are going to flow from those appointments under the Act. The Office of the Fire Commissioner has indicated through its public releases and everything that it intends to support the regional districts. So where they request staff to assist them with fire investigations or fire inspections where those are desired or needed, the Office of the Fire Commissioner has indicated it will provide staff to do those functions in support upon request. So in both cases where you need that function and you don't have the staff capacity or the ability, or you choose to want to use the OFC, Office of the Fire Commissioner staff, you then have the ability to do that. The training standards that the new act refers to, there's training standards for inspectors and investigators. These build off of the firefighter training standard that was brought in when I first began in my tenure as the fire commissioner for general structural firefighting. This will be an investigator and inspector. The standards have been put out now, and they're developing a course to enable staff to be trained and satisfied that they are competent to do those things. There's a 1 year period, a grace period as you call it, we built into the statute that said a year from the date that the statute becomes effective, you can continue on with people who are using or currently doing those functions. If you're satisfied that their training is adequate, you don't have to show that you've met the new training standard until 1 year post-implementation, if you will. So it just allows that period of time to do training if it's required for staff. In some cases, there won't be any new training required. They'll already be able to meet the standard. The fire bylaws, you currently understand that your bylaws are under review. So again, the updating needs to be done to ensure that you reference the act in all the right places, the current name, current sections, and some of the new material that's within the act will have to be reflected in the bylaws. Generally speaking, for those who might not be familiar, the bylaws, the reason that you generally reflect a lot of the information that is contained in the statute is because you wish to have the power to pursue things under a bylaw instead of using the statutory powers. So by putting them into a bylaw, you can then do a bylaw enforcement kind of an approach to things if you wish to. Again, with the powers in the Act, you can still proceed under the Act as long as you have people appointed, as we discussed earlier there. But with your bylaw enforcement side, you're not going to be able to do anything until you update your bylaws to reflect the current statutes, because the ones that are referenced now no longer exist as of August. And then finally, just some recommendations in terms of what we'd like to suggest, which is that the board obviously appoint the inspectors and investigators as discussed, that the staff prepare a report for yourselves as the electoral area directors to provide an overview of some of the more details that I've kind of glossed over here in this brief presentation, talk more about the obligations and the authorities, and also finally to update all of your fire establishment bylaws for each of the regional district fire departments to reflect all of these legislative changes. So hopefully I've provided a quick overview of that, but happy to take questions or assist staff in any questions that people may have. Thank you.
Thanks for the presentation. I would look to directors. I have Director Abbott followed by Wilson, and I've got a question myself. Director Abbott, the floor is yours.
Thank you, Chair. Mr. Anderson, can you repeat what you said about improvement districts in the speed? I didn't quite absorb what you...
Certainly. Okay. So improvement districts are, being that they're not a local government like a regional district and a municipality, the statute does not provide for them to have the ability to do appointments. So the appointments for inspector and investigators have to be in a regional district, which the improvement districts are located within. Then that area covered by the improvement district would be the RD's responsibility to do the appointments for those areas. Typically, an appointment, you would have some sort of geographic boundary associated to each person's appointment, and it might be whatever the fire protection area is. In the case of an improvement district, that would be their fire protection boundary. So the recommendation would be that you consult with them to say, okay, who is it in your improvement district has been doing them in the past? If they have, who do you wish to put forward as somebody who would be qualified to be appointed in that capacity going forward for your area? You're welcome.
Director Wilson.
Thank you, Chair. Hello, Gord. Good to see you again.
Yeah.
So one of the things that came up in there is that the bylaws have to be rewritten or amended. What kind of impact, and it's probably a question for staff, what kind of impact is that going to have on the staff resources that we have? And is there a time limit as to when these things have to be done by?
Maybe I could start with the time limit aspect of it. Essentially, with the way they brought the statute into effect, there wasn't a lot of pre-warning. Everybody was anticipating it for some time that it was coming into effect, but it was suddenly announced that it was effective pretty much immediately when the announcement came out. So as soon as they brought the repeal and replacement into effect, all your bylaw references to the old statute are no longer valid. So in effect, it has a means of invalidating any of the powers that are associated to it because that legislation doesn't exist anymore. So the urgency would be to ensure you have the ability to carry out any of the functions that your bylaw is allowed by ensuring that the references are all correct to the statute that you're drawing the power from. On the second part of the question, and then I'll defer to Glenn, is it's not a huge undertaking to rewrite bylaws. In a lot of cases, it's substituting the name of the act itself in some cases, some section numbers, and then also going through for the new powers that are brought in under the act, and there's a variety of them related to the power to seize evidence in a fire investigation and so on, and access to premises, just to make sure those things are properly referenced. So the wording of some of the powers has changed in the new act. So it's a matter of going in and ensuring all those things align in the bylaw. So it's not a complete rewrite. It's more of a going through section by section to ensure that they're correct and updated and adding any new material. And Glenn, if you wanted to add anything to that?
No, that's pretty much, time-wise, as quick as I can. I'm one person, so, again, getting the support from the other staff to find which bylaws are affected and then actioning them quickly. So.
Sounds like an awful lot of research to be done.
Thank you.
Director Martman.
Thank you. Just thinking that this has dollar implications and that would be coming down the road, but can you maybe give a high level of where some expenditures are going to be required?
From a high perspective, I gather what we just spoke of, some staff time to ensure the bylaws are rewritten or updated appropriately. With respect to inspections, because there's no essentially no change to the obligations of a regional district. As some of you may know, that was a lot of the holdup of bringing the act in, was whether or not regional districts were going to have to do fire inspections going forward like municipalities do or not. In the end, they opted to not bring that in. So there's no change to any mandatory inspection requirements. The old act in its wording essentially did very similar to this act in giving powers through the LAFC program that regional districts could exercise to do inspections where it was deemed necessary. In other words, if you had a complaint from the public or if your fire department noticed something and said, I need to go inspect that building and so on, those kinds of things already existed. So there's no new sort of cost that didn't sort of already exist, just different way of implementing it and authorizing it. With respect to fire investigations, that's the one area that might have some implication, and that was something that was addressed sort of from the very beginning in the sense of the OFC needed to be able to provide support to the regional districts to address the issue of a lack of staff or investigators at the RD level for those places that don't have somebody who's capable. And those are typically, the very rural areas where there's no fire department, there was nobody trained, nobody doing fire protection, and you had a fire that's reportable. It still needs to be investigated and the reporting made on it. Generally speaking, unless you're talking about a very significant fire, there's not a lot of time and cost associated with those things. It might be somebody literally going out to investigate a car being burned in the bush, for example, outside of a fire protection area. And they would go out to do a general determination of what might be the cause of it, gather that information, come back, input it in the computer into the OFC system for the reporting, and that would meet your obligation. Again, high level sort of approach to it.
And is there an overlap with wildfire services and investigations and, providing that kind of support?
Wildfires fall outside of this legislation. It has its own legislation to deal with wildfires. Areas that are covered by BC Wildfire Service, they have the responsibility to do investigations in those areas. They will support, it's generally a supportive effect back and forth in terms of one helping the other where it's needed. And of course, fire suppression is very much the same way. They will come in and assist where there is fire protection areas and vice versa when they're asked by fire departments can go outside to assist wildfire. So the investigation side is pretty much a status quo, I think, in that regard. And wildfires are not something that would be deemed a reportable fire under this legislation. It would be under their own legislation.
Thank you, Director Martman. So this is curious because when I read this report on the weekend, I didn't quite make the connection, and then it's all just come flooding back to me while I've been sitting here about all of the really fun meetings at UBCM and when this was initially rolled out, and all the questions like, is this a flat-out download? Is this increasing the responsibility? Do we need to have people in positions as a regional district, though we're not being tasked the way municipalities are? Are we obligated to be prepared to carry out the same sort of level of service? And I just recall that there were tens of thousands of potential inspectable properties, and then that list was reduced to, several thousands of properties that would need to be inspected to, now it's not a requirement to inspect. But I guess to sort of wrap up my question, are appointments required of regional districts? If we make the appointments, are we required to fully follow the extent of the legislation, and is there an option to not appoint and just let the Office of the Fire Commissioner do all the work?
I'll put my old hat on at the same time for this answer. The answer is yes, you're required to appoint statutorily. There's a requirement. There is no opting out clause, as much as people would like that. There was, as you said, there was a lot of discussion about that and how that would be supported, and that whole discussion around whether RDs would or not be required to do inspections, because we essentially have a double standard right now where in a municipality there is a mandatory inspection requirement, and outside of municipalities there's places that have never been inspected, and they weren't inspected when they were built, they've never been inspected when they're occupied, and there's no way to determine if they're even built to code, let alone fire code safety and considerations. So that was all that background piece to it. So the requirement was, we put it in to the act for the RDs to empower them to do it when it was something they deemed necessary, the same as it is under the old act, where they had the powers through the bylaws and the statute. If they had an LAFC appointment, they could access all the powers to do those things when it was prudent to do it as it was written in the old statute. And it's very similar in the current one. It doesn't create a new obligation to do something. I can't think of an example of any new obligation you would have under that. It says that by virtue of the appointment, these people now can access the powers to do these things when it's deemed advisable. If you had a complaint, if the fire department needed to do it, because if you didn't give that power through the appointments, you would not be able to do any of those things or access any of those powers, even if you want to. And the whole thing was predicated on, if the RD wants and needs to do it, it has the ability to do it, not that it's being forced to do something new. I hope that addresses it.
Well, it does, but something you'd mentioned during your presentation, and if I could be incorrect in this, but my assumption is that the previous LAFCs would operate within the extent of their specified areas. And if I heard you correctly, I think you said that if the RD embarks to invoke these powers, then it's for the entire RD. So is that not an expansion of the areas that would need to be covered if they are outside of a current existing fire protection area?
The best way to put it is that the appointments you make, you determine, for example, if you want to put geographic boundaries on a particular person's appointment to say that this particular person can only investigate in this fire protection area, and because other fire protection areas have their own people appointed and so on, you can geographically bound them with your appointment and structure saying within this particular area, you have this appointment, these powers. Where the slight difference is that for the areas that had nobody before, they're now saying now there needs to be somebody to address the statutory requirement of having somebody appointed for the area. But you don't want to confuse that with saying that there's a requirement to do something further, as in do inspections or anything. It's just you need somebody appointed who has jurisdiction over the area in the event you need to and wish to exercise the powers of that inspector in that area. So in before, you were relying on if it wasn't an LAFC, what you would be requiring.
Oh,
Sure,
yes.
sorry.
Thank you.
What you'd be required to do is contact the OFC to go and do the exercise, because the fire commissioner and staff had the power anywhere in the province, so they could go and exercise the powers. If you, under the old system in LAFC, it was whatever your area was bounded by, you could exercise it. If there was nobody appointed for that area, then it would be the OFC would be the only one who would have the powers to do it. So this expanded the ability to exercise the powers, but it didn't say you had to go out and do inspections there. It was the same criteria as it was for the inside the area, an option, if you will.
Fair enough, thanks. Director Nicholson.
Well, just on this question of investigations, no, not investigations, on, what's the other thing?
Inspections?
Inspections.
Yes.
So when would you want to do inspections? Like when would we decide that we think we should do inspections? For multi-unit housing or something like that?
So inspectable properties generally are, you're looking at multifamily housing and or commercial, industrial, and so on. You're not looking at single-family dwellings, duplexes, that sort of thing. They're not considered inspectable properties when you have an inspection requirement. So where you might want to do one is if somebody, could be staff, could be a member of the public, notes something that's considered to be a fire hazard, for example, in a building, like a commercial building, and they say, well, somebody needs to go in and inspect. I don't think this place is safe. It's not it's not compliant with the fire code. This then says you now have somebody who can go in and exercise the powers, do an inspection, write an enforcement order if one was needed, or gain compliance with the person and do all the things you would normally do based on that. That would be like upon complaint, upon observation by a fire department member, and so on.
Yeah, I'm still a little bit confused because most buildings have requirements for fire, multi-unit buildings would have requirements for fire alarms and sprinklers potentially and all that kind of stuff. So this would be inspection on top of it to make sure that happened, or should be part of the building thing?
So there's two facets here, and this goes back to the whole whether or not building inspections take place in the first instance, and then whether fire inspections are taking place regularly or not. The Fire and Building Code has requirements on different buildings requirements for fire alarms, building standpipe systems, sprinklers, all these kinds of things. So if they're built to code, and somebody's inspected it, building inspecting before occupancy and certified everything's built to code, once occupancy takes over and people move into the building and start using it, the fire code takes over, and it's intertwined in some ways with the building code. But the problem is that after you have occupancy, if you don't have a fire inspection, you have no way to know whether the system's even working unless the person is maintaining it voluntarily as they're supposed to and required to do. But you often come across systems, especially in older buildings, where they haven't been maintained. They haven't done regular maintenance. They haven't had inspections done on the equipment. Equipment has failed. Standpipe system are plugged up with rust and don't work in the event of a fire, and so on. That's what a fire inspection covers off, is it finds these defects so you can get them corrected and keep them compliant so everything's working. Without them, you're just relying on the building owner's goodwill to do what they're supposed to be doing and maintaining it, inspecting, and so on. So it's that sort of a system right now.
Well, I have another question, but just to follow up on this particular topic, it seems that at some point we might want to think about that because we're starting to get into a lot more multi-unit residential kind of developments. And so what would trigger us starting to think that we should?
That's a difficult one because, from an RD perspective, you're talking a very large area that you could be looking at. I guess I'll put my old hat on and view as from a fire safety perspective. My view was everywhere should be inspected. Every inspectable property should be subject to some form of an inspection program, strictly from a life safety perspective, to make sure things are done, maintained. Everything is done simply for compliance purposes. You're not trying to punish or penalize people. So the trigger would be very difficult because it's, right now you're basically looking at if something came to your attention And usually what happens, unfortunately, is you have a catastrophic fire, and that's when you find out that things weren't done properly and that systems weren't working and so on. So from a proactive perspective, if you wish to be proactive, you'd want to start bringing forward some sort of a system of inspection. It could be a graduated one because you're not mandated anything at the moment. You can design and implement a graduated system if you wish to. That would probably be the recommended approach to start, and starting with the highest risk buildings, ones that are like light industrial, manufacturing, things that have a higher fire risk associated, and or ones that are assembly occupancies, like where people live and so on and assemble. That would probably be your trigger, if I can leave it at that.
When we go to Director Acton, I'll come back to you. Director Acton?
My question is around the improvement districts. So I assume the province has already let them know this legislation is coming, so they would have to change their bylaws too. And have you been working with the improvement districts on this or discussing it with them already?
Yeah, I'll let Glenn answer that. He's actually...
So right after I got the position I'm in, I contacted all the improvement district fire chiefs. Wanted to introduce myself. I knew them all anyways, but just to make sure they know I was in the position, and made verbal contact with them to say that Fire Safety Act, it looks like it's coming down, and there's some stuff we're gonna have to deal with that. So it's something to start thinking about. Once it actually came down and at the time, I sent an email to say, could you please send me your designates type thing. So throughout the whole time since I've been in position, I've been talking with them nonstop. They're every couple of days, most of them are talking to me. We all work together. So, yeah. So there's definitely contact and definitely communication.
Follow up?
Okay, good to hear. And fire inspector, I thought, was actually the fire chief. Is that, so that's not the case?
So it's for improvement district, you mean?
Yeah, in the improvement district, the fire chief doesn't have that designation?
Sorry.
If given to them by the improvement district, that is correct.
Oh, yeah, okay,
Yeah.
so that's what I thought.
Yeah.
Okay,
And sorry to answer that further, the improvement districts under the old system, the LAFC one, the improvement district would put a request into the OFC for the LAFC designation for that improvement district, for that chief and so on. With the LAFC's gone, it's the regional district that takes over that function of appointment.
Director Nicholson?
Thank you. So how do we fund these? How do we pay for it? What's the service function number?
So there's sort of two aspects to it. With respect to the appointment, the requirement is you appoint somebody who has authority within the regional district, and it could be multiple people with various ones, and you're basically replicating from an inspector's point of view what already existed, with the exception of, for example, somebody like Glenn's position might have the authority over these areas where there were no LAFCs before, in other words, those more rural, remote areas, so that there is somebody appointed with authority in those areas. So the appointment of it, I don't know what sort of direct cost would be associated to appointing the person to it. The use of the powers, again, would depend on when you choose to use them. There might be some associated, like, example would be travel costs to travel to wherever it is to do the investigation or inspection and so on. And so there might be some minor cost associated to that. There's no funding mechanism if you're looking for that in terms of external funding coming in to fund that sort of thing. With municipalities, they're become what's called a monitoring entity. So they have the power to pass bylaws to assess fees. So they can assess fees associated to covering the cost of the inspection program and all its different aspects of it. So that's built into the legislation for those that are required to do inspections. So it doesn't answer your question on the RD side, but there is that aspect built in where you are required to do it. So inspections wise, but on investigation side, again, there's no funding mechanism. This is where the OFC part stepped in to say, if that's not something you can do or can't afford to do or choose not to do, you still have to have somebody appointed, but you can then request us to provide the investigator to go do the investigation and do the reporting.
Okay, thank you.
And that's when all the electoral area directors stood up in the meeting at UBCM and said, the OFC better get ready for a lot of phone calls because you'll be required to come and do a lot of that work in the rural areas, so.
And that was flagged. Yep,
Yes,
absolutely.
exactly. So, any further questions? Is an information item, I believe? It is. Thank you very much for the presentation, and I guess we'll be contemplating appointments in the next little while. So,
Thank you.
Thank you very much. Ms. Boyd?
Thank you, Chair. We are on R3, report from the Fire Rescue Services regarding the Fire Services Agreement between the Capital Regional District and Malahat Fire Rescue.
This should be fairly quick. Mr. Elzinga?
Just on behalf of Mr. Cooper, who's just stepped out for a second, this report is around an agreement between the Capital Regional District and the Couch Valley Regional District for the continuation of the existing service to provide fire service to that area of the Capital Regional District.
Director Nick? Oh, hang on. We got a hand go up. Director Nicholson?
I had a question about the funding. So we have we need to do a significant capital investment in the Malahat. And I'm wondering if that's taken into account in this funding?
I'm looking at Mr. Postings. I don't know the answer to that off the top of my head, so maybe Mr. Postings can help me with that one.
Yeah, good question, through the chair to Director Nicholson. Yeah, so the budget is done based on the assessments for the properties, and so however that budget, however the capital is not part of those operating costs that we would be charging to the CRD. So the capital is separate, it is not part of the process, however the operating aspect of it. And that is very consistent with all the agreements that we have. And many agreements on the capital is not. But if, for example, there's a new truck or something along that, there is components that they would contribute to a different piece of equipment that would meet. So it is not covered specifically for, like, say, the fire hall. I think that's what you're referring to. It would be for the operating of that fire hall, so the maintenance, it could be the hydro and all those aspects relating to that, yeah.
Follow up?
Can we change that? I mean, when you think about asset management, it should be part of our regular business, so we should be regularly charging everyone what it costs to maintain or replace our assets.
Yeah. Certainly, in any agreement, there's opportunities to look at different approaches. I think as new assets come online, those are the type of conversations that we should have with our partners and with the, so at this point in time, we know that we're in the planning phases for a new facility in the Malahat, but we're not quite at that point. But as we move forward, for sure, it's something that we can put on the table and have a conversation with those partners that we have agreements with. It's a bit early for this particular one because we don't know those costs, so it would be difficult for us to get into a conversation relating to what that might look like. But and these agreements certainly have opportunities for us to open them up and have a look if those costs do increase. So certainly a possibility, and it's something we can certainly bring back at the right time for discussion, both for Malahat as well as the other facilities that come online that have agreements.
But I think we have the issue in that there's reciprocal agreements like this all across the province, and that I think the idea is we don't pay their capital and they don't pay our capital, and that's a fairly standard template. So I had mover, seconder here. Any further discussion on this item? Questions? On screen, seeing none. All those in favor? Any opposed? None opposed. The motion carries. I didn't have them read out, though. Is that an issue? Okay, next item.
Thank you, Chair. R4, report from the Development Services Division regarding zoning amendment bylaw 4568, CD1, comprehensive development, one zoned, Paldi, referred from the June 12th, 2024 board meeting. This is not subject to public input per Bill 44.
Ms. Pressman.
Sorry, I'm just trying to get set up with my computer and this one.
She's about to.
So just to start off with, yeah, this zoning bylaw amendment has been brought forward by staff and is not an application, and so is not subject to public input under the updates to the Local Government Act, because it pertains to residential uses in the zoning. And this report, should I go over give the overview again like I gave in June? Okay. So this zoning bylaw amendment was originally brought forward by myself in June and was referred back to staff after we heard from the developers that they had come to an agreement and would be submitting a proposal. However, that agreement did not come to fruition, and so is being brought back with essentially the same report and draft zone, with the addition of commercial uses being permitted on 2 of the properties that are adjacent to Paul D. Road that are down at the bottom of the screen. So this comprehensive development zone applies to 7 properties that were originally part of a zoning amendment several years ago that brought this into place. This originally included a development permit area as well that pertains specifically to these properties. This slide shows the distribution of ownership amongst the properties, and so the green is owned by the Mayo family, and the blue is Elkridge Estates, and the orange are owned by Kunal Nagpal, and are referred to in the report as the village properties. There are also a number of covenants that are registered on these properties that were registered with the rezoning, which include a number of amenity requirements, including dedication of the historical cemetery and the historical temple lands, as well as parks and trails amenities, implementation of any recommendations of the fire service review for the Satlam Fire Service area as well. And so this is the map that originally was part of the development permit area under the previous OCP that was repealed in 2021. And back at the time of rezoning, it was anticipated that a commercial center shown in pink on the map would be developed on the east side of Paul D. Road, with higher density residential uses and potentially mixed commercial residential in orange and lower density in the yellow areas. With the changes in ownership and intentions of developers, the current proposals and subdivision applications that are underway are not applying this same distribution and mix, and with legal review of the current zoning bylaw, or legal advice was that the current regulation that density will be distributed by development permit is not appropriate to have in the zoning. Therefore, staff have tried to amend the zoning bylaw in a manner that will equitably distribute the density, residential density, and commercial uses. I'm just going to skip over these for now. This is just a summary of the proposed zoning bylaw amendment. There are also some redundant elements in the current zoning that are also addressed in the covenants, and so those are proposed to be removed. Commercial uses are proposed to be permitted on the Elkridge parcel, as well as 2 village parcels adjacent to Paul D. Road, with institutional public uses permitted on all of the parcels. And then the distribution of density, there's current section 5 that has a proportional mix of lot sizes that is proposed to be removed, as well as reducing the lot sizes for residential uses. Similar to all our other zones, attached suites would be permitted now in all of the residential parcels, with detached suites permitted on larger parcels. And so what we did was had applied 13 residential parcels to the Mayo properties, where we do have applications underway that propose unserviced large lots, and distributing the remainder of the residential units by parcel area for the Elkridge and the Village sites. And so the recommendation is that, similar to when we have development applications for rezoning, that this proceed to referral agencies and First Nations prior to board consideration of bylaw readings, as well as referral to Area E and F advisory planning commissions. And the recommendation as well that we report back on the covenant implementation. We didn't include an update on that in this report, but that is forthcoming.
Thank you, Ms. Pressman. So I think now is the time for Chair to set the table on how we might proceed forward here. So this is, I think, would give this the equivalency of the first blush look application, an initial application. And so what is being asked here is and this is like an iceberg. We're looking at 1/7. There's 6/7 of it below the surface, and there's a lot of work that staff have done on this. But for the purposes of today, we have a recommendation to send this out for referral. So that's the extent of what we're doing. Hang on, I got you there, Director Acton. So I had a discussion with Director Nicholson beforehand, and I think there might be a desire to do the referrals and then have the package, once the referrals have been received, to go out to the APCs. So for the purposes of today, are we going to move this forward with and send this for referrals? And I'd had a suggestion that we move 1 and 3 for the purposes of today. And with that, I also want to state that the intent was at the last meeting that there was an opportunity for the applicants to get their heads together and see if there was a opportunity for them to come forward with a united application. This will go to the board on what day? October 30th? And then the referrals will go out. So this is, I'm hoping staff, and we're viewing this as it's preliminary in the process. So I'm looking to our applicants and saying it's early in the process, and if there's potential for them to have some additional discussions, then that would be a good thing. So with that, I would just ask, are there any questions for staff? Question for staff, Director Abbott. Or no, sorry, yeah, Director Acton, you're first. Go ahead.
I have 2 questions, but this is on the process, so just so that I understand, why would we not allow public input but then send it to the APCs?
Ms. Boyd?
I'm not connecting.
Or Ms. Pressman?
As a referral to, in the recommendation to the APCs, it's the feedback back on the.
From other agencies. Like referrals from other agencies.
Yeah.
And then the APC to comment on those. Okay. I guess that makes some sense. Second question, this is just so on those, it said that 1 hectare lots were the minimum if they weren't connected to water and sewer. Is that to encourage people to hook up to water and sewer? Or is that something that Island, like where do we get that 1 hectare from?
Go ahead.
Through the chair to
It's not
Director
quite
Acton.
connected to this, but go ahead, yeah.
Yeah, that 1 hectare is recommended as a minimum for unserviced lots in the provincial guidance
Yep.
for.
Yep.
Mm-hmm.
Director Abbott.
Thank you, Chair. I think this is the first time I've heard reference to an application not being subject to public hearing because of Bill 44. Of course, that just became law in the spring, and I would, as a commenter, I think we should be reminded as we read staff reports that this is not subject to public hearing because of Bill 44. We're denied. But here's me editorializing. I sense that Bill 44 was for the small lot subdivision in a city where somebody wants to take a lot and divide it and perhaps add 3 lots. This is a large...
I'm really concerned about editorializing at this point. If you could perhaps stick to reference to the report and the...
It's a big development. Directors have received correspondence. Is it conceivable that we defer for 2 more weeks, 3 more weeks, to allow as they were asked in June, to allow the property owners to come up with something, 3 to 4 more weeks deferral, to go through what are some pretty pragmatic observations by one of the proponents, one of the applicants? That, I guess, would be my question. Is it possible to defer this and let the developers hammer out a deal?
Investment, if you like, we have that option. It would take a referral motion by a director and to be seconded. That's all that's required. I think that staff have brought this forward because they feel it's time to move forward on this application. But do you want to venture into this, Ms. Pressman?
Through the chair. Yeah, I just want to also point out that we did also provide notice in January to all of the owners that we would be developing an amendment, give an opportunity then as well. It is possible and it's likely that staff are going to continue to communicate with the developers, with the owners, and that with the referral feedback as well, we may come forward with revisions to the draft before consideration by EASC. And so we also are trying to be mindful that one of the subdivision applications could be prohibited from proceeding with the current zoning as well, the Mayo parcel, which is proposed to be developed with individual service lots. But we will be continuing to report back to ESC. And there's still, without public hearing, I can also just comment that there is still possibility that the board could require a public information meeting, which gives the opportunity for the public to ask questions and potentially have some discussions with staff and the owners as well, just not in a public hearing format or at a EASC or board meeting.
Follow up, are you done? Director Nicholson.
Yeah, I think a public information meeting is essential. So I am really confused by this. I get the issue, but can you explain to me how what you're proposing, what it looks like on a map?
Ms. Pressman?
I can show the current concepts that we have from the owners. Those are continuing to undergo revisions. That was presented as well in 2021 to the board with the Phase 1 development permit for Elkridge. And so this is in the absence of the former development permit area and requiring an amendment to that, leaving it more open to the property owners to bring forward the mix, the distribution of the density that would develop.
Director Nicholson?
So this is about a development in the middle of, not nowhere, but in the middle of an undeveloped area, approximately halfway between the town of Lake Cowichan and Duncan. And we talk about complete communities, developing complete communities, pushing development to where there's a growth containment boundary. So we've got nothing out there, but we've got a growth containment boundary around this thing. but we don't have a plan to make sure, and we have a water license that is okay for phase one, but we don't have a plan for ensuring that as we phase this in, dependent on water, as we phase this in, that there will be a complete community from the get-go. And if we don't do that, then we're going to end up with a lot of people living out in the middle of virtually nowhere. And you can say that it's a, 11-minute car ride down Highway 18 to Duncan or to Lake Town of Lake Cowichan, but that to me isn't a complete community anymore. We should be talking about walking to a grocery store, having a...
Point of order, Mr. Chair.
What's your point?
Is this in any way, is it including what we're talking about here? Because we're editorializing again.
I'm...
Director Nicholson, I think his point is in order in that this is a referral of what staff has been put forward. It's not a debate on the merits of the overall application. So we can have that. I will likely yield the chair if we're going to go deep into that, but his point is taken and it's in order. So if you can continue with your next line of inquiry.
Well, my point is, really, I'm trying to figure out whether staff are proposing something that is going to make certain that this will be a complete community at phase one, or whether they're just going down the road of what the developers would like to do. So we had originally a comprehensive development zone that had specific things in it, and I don't see that we're going to be getting that with this proposal.
Ms. Pressman.
Through the chair, it would be ideal if they would provide a joint proposal. I do want to just point out, though, that this proposed zoning is consistent with the current OCP land use designations and growth containment boundary.
Thank you. Turn to Director Segal.
I'll move number 1 and 3.
Do we have a seconder? We have a seconder. Ms. Boyd, would you read items 1 and 3 of the staff recommendation?
Thank you, Chair. That it be recommended to the board that bylaw 4568 Electoral Area F, Cowichan Lake, Scotts Falls zoning amendment bylaw CD1 Comprehensive Development 1 Zone PALDI 2024 be referred to the following external agencies and First Nations. A, the Ministry of Transportation and Infrastructure. B, Ministry of Land, Water, Resource Stewardship, Water authorizations, that's be the water licensing, ecosystems, the Water Sustainability Act, and fish habitat, that's the RAPR. C, BC Hydro. D, Cowichan Valley School District 79. Electoral areas E, Cowichan Station, Satlam, Glenora, and F, Cowichan Lake South, Scotts Falls Advisory Planning Commissions, Satlam Volunteer Fire Department, Cowichan Tribes, Liaxin First Nation, Penelakut Tribe, Halalt First Nation, Subasek First Nation, and Stuminas First Nation, and that staff be directed to report back to the Electoral Area Services Committee on the implementation of the existing covenants on the subject properties.
Director Nicholson.
I'd like clarification. So Electoral Area E Advisory Planning Commission is in that list, but it would be preferable if they received it to comment on after all the other comments are in from the other agencies. Will that happen, or should I make an amendment to this?
Ms. Pressman.
It should be amended if the desire is to refer it after referral comments from other agencies and First Nations.
I'd suggest we have a resolution on the floor to entertain a motion following the completion of the vote on 1 and 3. Are you okay with that?
You don't want to just amend this motion? I don't want to do that.
Well, I think we could, we've got a motion on the floor, and we could implement that once that's completed, because then the list will be done and it'll achieve the same effect. Any further discussion on 1 and 3? Seeing none, call the question. All those in favor? Any opposed? I see none opposed. The motion carries. And the subsequent motion would be to, that the referrals to electoral area F and E APCs occur following the receipt of the referral information. Would you move that? You move that? Moved and seconded. Any further discussion or questions? Discussion? Seeing none, all those in favor? Any opposed? None opposed, the motion carries. You've got all that, Ms. Boyd? Thank you, Ms. Pressman, and let's break until 2:50, please, and thank you.
You bring a trailer?
Welcome back, everyone, from our rousing first hour and 10 minutes. Turn to Ms. Boyd, R5.
Thank you, Chair. Report from the Development Services Division regarding application number LCR 24B01-2890, Shawnigan Lake Road, PID 006-974767.
Welcome.
Thank you, Chair. This is a LCRB application for liquor primary new outdoor patio by the Black Swan Inn located at 2890 Shawnigan Lake Road. The proposal would expand capacity to a total of 40 persons outdoors in an existing patio area, which was previously approved by building inspection and was constructed during COVID under the Temporary Expanded Service Area, or TESA. Staff consider the proposal to comply with permitted uses in the zone and to be consistent with OCP policies. Therefore, staff are recommending that the CVRD opt out of providing comments. And by opting out, the LCRB will continue with their community notification process.
Turn to Director Acton.
Thank you. So the community, of course, loves patios and would like to see more patios, and more capacity would be even better. My question though is, in the report I saw, I don't remember where it was, but 8 p.m. as the patio use. So by that being in there, who's enforcing that? What does that do?
Ms. DeBennett.
The enforcement of the liquor hours would be LCRB.
It's in, where is it in the application? Because that seems like a little early for a patio to close.
Right, so when the CVRD receives applications from the LCRB, we are referred basically an email notifying us of the application. And then staff go into the application portal on the LCRB, and it details what the application is for and typically specifies hours. So the hours are coming from the LCRB application. Staff also had a conversation with the applicant's son about this application, and we're advised that the hours for outdoors had been reduced to 8 in response to comments LCRB received for the previous application, which is discussed in the background in the staff report.
So the question before us today is opt in or opt out?
That's right.
Director Acton, what's your preference?
Opting out, of course, but
Would you like to move that recommendation?
I think the applicant should have the ability to like 8 p.m. It's too early in Shawnigan Lake, that's all I can say. But, so, if the applicant has no problem with it, that's fine, but.
May I
Ms. DeBennett?
speak? So this staff report is not regulating the hours. It's simply to ask the board whether they want to opt in or opt out of providing comments to the LCRB. So if you want to provide a comment in relation to hours, I think you could add that to the recommendation, I guess, to board.
Can I get some clarification on that? Because my understanding is if we start commenting, then we have to go public. And there's a whole process involved.
Right, so,
unless-
yeah, so staff would provide an alternative recommendation to do that.
Okay.
I guess I would
let's
just
go for it.
say, I'm just going to leave it as it is, and we have a week to change anything if it seems important to move this forward. So just leave it how it is.
Okay, so you're moving the staff recommendation and seconded. Any further discussion? Looking on screen, seeing none. All those in favor? Any opposed? None opposed, the motion carries. Next item, Ms. Boyd.
Thank you, Chair. We have a report from the Development Services Division regarding application numbers DVP 24H03 and SA 23H02, 12421 Rocky Creek Road, PID 000372650.
Ms. DeBenna.
Thank you, Chair. So this, there's two applications before you here. Proposed two-lot subdivision requires a frontage exemption under SA 23H02 and a development variance permit for the siting of existing buildings and to increase the floor area of an existing detached suite to allow for the proposed two-lot subdivision. So the road frontage for both proposed lots is under 10% of the total perimeter, therefore requiring exemption from Section 5112 of the Local Government Act. In addition, the applicant is requesting several variances for the siting of existing buildings in the context of the new parcel lines that would result from the proposed subdivision. Those are shown on the slide there. In addition, the existing detached suite is measured at 68 square meters, so currently it meets the zoning bylaw regulation for detached suites. But with the proposed subdivision, the lot would be reduced and the 68 square meters would be oversized and requires a variance. Notices were delivered to owners and occupants, and staff have provided copies of all public correspondence received prior to this meeting. So staff are recommending support of both the frontage exemption and the variances, and the recommendation is in front of you there.
Thanks, Ms. DeBenna. Any questions for staff? Director Markman.
Thank you, and I'll call this the Rubik Cube of developments because you actually have to flip this to make the front line the sideline and the sideline the back line type of approach. So thanks for clarifying that. I have a couple of questions because some of the concerns raised by neighbors were particularly around, if you want to flip the plan up, please. The top yellow, red oval there is I think they described as a garage, and it's asking for one of the setbacks, and I believe just above that little oval is their bedroom. And so they have concerns just about what may happen, with that building. And so, I mean, these buildings have been here since 1960-ish. So they well precede the CVRD, and I get what what you're recommending. But I'm wondering if you can maybe let they understand a little better about what can happen to that building if the variance is granted in terms of expanding it, raising the roof, developing into something else in the garage.
Ms. DeBenna.
Thank you, Chair, to Director Martman. So the permit is written to permit the existing single-story accessory building where it is and as it is. If they propose to increase height within that setback area or horizontally encroach further in the setback area, they would require another variance. If they apply to change the use, it's a different building, so I don't believe it's protected under Section 529 of the Local Government Act, and they would need to apply for a variance. They can't tear it down and rebuild in that location. They can maintain it and repair it. it's a bit of a gray area, but there's no proposal to do that at this time. On top of that, I know the question had been about whether it could be converted into a detached suite. So there's already an existing detached suite on this lot. So if they wanted to do something like that, they would need to either decommission that other detached suite or remove it, or they apply for a rezoning for a third dwelling. Does that answer your question?
Yeah, I think what you're saying, regardless of if anything's going to happen to that, it would come back to the board for future discussion. And that also, if we approve the increase to 68 meters squared for the detached suites, you actually are in some ways saying, hey, that's where the detached suites will be, this is where the dwelling will be. That's one question. Another one. Second one is now further on to the other side of proposed Lot 1, I believe it's called, that goes along Rocky Creek Road in that circle. I noticed that the setback reduction is along the Modi side, so it's on the left side of that square rectangular building, but nothing's being asked for in terms of a variance to that building because it's built almost on the property line. And so I'm wondering, is that in the best interest of the CVRD to sort of nail those things down now? Or why there isn't a variance being asked for that side?
So thank you, Chair, to Director Martman. I don't want to speak on behalf of the best interests of the CVRD, but I can tell you that the parcel lines in that situation are only changing from the road, so the front, which is circled. So there's no change to the interior parcel line, which is along, I guess, the south there.
Right.
So the applicant had the option to include that, just, basically for what you're asking, but declined. So the agent is here online and he may be able to speak further to that.
Sure.
Yeah.
I had one more question before the question to the agent. If that's...
Go ahead.
Thank you, Chair. And that is right in the middle of that red circle there. I would say there is a covered pit that looks to be a hazard. Is that something that the CVRD would, or that the agent would speak to, or would you speak to?
Through the chair, I have seen the covered pit, and I have I'm not sure if maybe the agent can speak to it further.
Okay.
Yeah.
It looks to be a hazard. Yeah, thanks.
Any other questions for staff before we go to the agent? Can you drop your presentation so I can see if our colleagues joining remotely are? Any hands from our colleagues not here? Seeing none. Can we ask if the agent would like to join us now? Welcome.
Thank you, Chair and Committee. Thank you for having me. I am here to represent the owner on this application, and with respect to the variance for the existing building, that existing building has legal non-conforming status. That lot line isn't changing, the location of the building isn't changing, and therefore it's not required to specifically vary that, since it's just not legally required. The lot line that is changing is that little roundabout to provide access from Rocky Creek Road. And that is the lot line that is changing and does affect the setback to that building. And that's why we're specifically applying for that variance. With respect to that pit, that's an oil change pit. I talked to the owner. They're not currently using it, but it's also it's contained on private property. There's no public access to this property. Public access would be considered trespassing on private property. So, not an issue for the owner, but I don't know that he would have any objections to safely covering it or potentially filling it.
Director Martman.
Thank you. I'm familiar with the oil pit, being a farmer, and it's one of those things that actually, when that sort of flags a concern, and maybe that's something just to flag for your applicant, in that it may be something to really take care of now rather than leaving for the future. But thank you.
Any other questions for the applicant? Do you have anything you'd like to add further to what staff have added or provided?
Thank you for the question. I don't really have anything further to add. Jamie, planner, provided a fantastic report. I think it's very comprehensive and complete. The small accessory building, which there's been some question about on the northern portion of the remainder lot, the owner actually intends to tear down that building in the future to facilitate the construction of his new house. The intent of this two-lot subdivision is to provide for two separate lots for the owner and his brother to just build new houses for themselves. The existing house that's on the remainder parcel is also going to be torn down in the future in order for them to build new houses on this lot. So that's the intent. That building won't be there too much longer, and of course will be deconstructed with a demolition permit that'll go alongside with the building permit for the new building.
Love that forethought. Director Martman.
Thank you. If there's no one else have any questions, then I would move the recommendation.
Moved and
Read
seconded.
it
Ms. Boyd, would you read the recommendation, please?
Thank you, Chair. That it be recommended to the board that proposed Lot 1 and remainder District Lot 78 in subdivision application number SA 23H02 12421 Rocky Creek Road, PID 000372650, be exempted from the minimum parcel frontage requirement in accordance with Section 512 of the Local Government Act, and that development variance permit number DVP 24H03 12421 Rocky Creek Road, PID 000372650, be issued.
Any further discussion on this item? Seeing no hands at home, call the question. All in favor? Any opposed? None opposed. The motion carries, and that will go to the October 30th board. R7, Ms. Boyd.
Thank you, Chair. Report from the Development Services Division regarding application number ALR 23E014005 Row Road, PID 009649557.
Welcome, Mr. Buchan.
Thank you.
Floor is yours.
And if we could advance to the next slide, please. This is reintroducing an application which proposes to allow for a subdivision of the property located at 4005 Row Road. The application proposes to subdivide a 1 hectare portion of the lands that were previously excluded from the ALR in the 1980s. Next slide, please. A subdivision application was first submitted in 2019 but was denied, and following denial, a CVRD-initiated zoning amendment was introduced in July of 2019 to redesignate the portions of the excluded land from industrial to agricultural, and to also allow for subdivision potential along the boundary of the ALR. The application proposes to subdivide, proposes two subdivision options. Option 2 proposes to subdivide along the boundary of the ALR and is consistent with existing zoning, whereas option 1, which is shown on the screen attached, is to subdivide a panhandle parcel and secure access via easement to the parcel in the back. That is not presently supported by current zoning. And if we could advance, please, to the next slide. So option 2 is what's presently permitted under zoning. It would require a decision of the ALC, and it would also require an access via easement, so the agent has provided two options for access, and staff have included optional comments that could be included in a recommendation to the ALR. Next slide, please. The application was previously sent to the Advisory Planning Commission for feedback. The APC was generally supportive of advancing the application to the ALR. They had some comments on an existing building, and after staff have investigated, we've determined that the structure in question was permitted as an accessory office building in the 1980s and is permitted to remain on the property. Next slide, please. So the staff recommendation is to forward this application to the ALR, so the ALC, so there can be a decision. There's comments around not supporting option 1, supporting option 2, and providing some language for an access easement or covenant. And if I could also make a comment, that right now the decision is to just send this to the ALC for a decision to allow for subdivision or not. If the ALC does allow for subdivision, it would then go through the Ministry of Transportation, through their subdivision process. That involves us and would involve development permits and all that sort of stuff. So I'm here for questions, and the agent is also in the room.
So if I'm understanding correctly, if there is authorization from the ALC, it will come back, not necessarily to us, though. but it will come back for development permit.
Correct. So any subdivision application would involve the Ministry of Transportation. It gets referred to us, and any necessary development permits are dealt with at that time as well.
All right, thank you. Questions for staff? Director Wilson.
Thank you, Chair. One part of it mentions a derelict building, and then the APC asked for it to be removed, but staff says, no, it can stay there. I'm a bit concerned about, is it derelict? Is it used?
Through the chair, I'm not an expert in terms of building. It certainly doesn't look like it's in a great state, but it is permitted, and it is permitted to remain, and the owner could conduct repairs on the building.
Okay, good, thank you.
Any other questions for staff? Director Segal.
So I'm hoping you can just clarify for me. I was confused. Somewhere in the report or one of the attachments, it talks about that proposed lot 1 is already removed from the ALR. Can you elaborate?
So through the chair, the property as a whole is not entirely wholly within the agricultural land reserve. There's a portion that was excluded from the ALR in the 1980s. That was done under a previous application through the ALC. Things are a little bit different today for exclusions. Those are local government driven, but this is a historic one that is presently excluded.
That's good. Any further questions for staff? Seeing none, okay, I was going to see if the applicant wanted to add anything. Mr. DeVoe, would you like to add anything to staff's information?
I'm not a techie. No, I have nothing to add except that in 1987, 0.9 of a hectare was taken out of the ALR. Unfortunately, the scale of the drawing did not really see the panhandle that was still ALR leading to the road and the only road access for the entire parcel. So when we traded our industrial, we were given 0.9 of a hectare lot size and we were going to go home. Everything was fine. But then we found that there was this ALR little bit, which we're not allowed to subdivide. So we decided we would hook it to the remainder, have one form of access up the property line or around the new lot, and we're good to go.
Great, thank you. Any questions for Mr. DeVoe? Seeing none, thank you very much. Director Nicholson.
I move the recommendation.
Do we have a seconder? We have a seconder. Ms. Boyd.
Thank you, Chair. I can read it out. That it be recommended to the board that application number ALR 23E014005 Row Road PID 009649557 for a subdivision along the Agricultural Land Reserve ALR boundary be forwarded to the Agricultural Land Commission with the following comments. With respect to subdivision option 1, the CVRD advises that this option is inconsistent with the existing official community plan policy and zoning and therefore not supported. With respect to subdivision 2, option 2, that the CVRD advises that while this option is inconsistent with existing official community plan policy, it is consistent with the existing zoning which permits further subdivision. And if the ALC authorizes a subdivision, the CVRD recommends that the ALC require the following as a condition of subdivision. A, an access easement and covenant in favor of the ALC consistent with access route option 2 be registered with priority over proposed lot 1 in favor of parcel A for residential and farm vehicle access and over parcel A in favor of proposed lot 1 for access to Row Road.
Thank you. Any further discussion? Seeing none, all those in favor? Any opposed? None opposed, motion carries. That'll go to the October 30th board meeting. Ms. Boyd, next item, and I think you have a note to add to this.
Yes, with the new Bill 44 coming forward, we also should have noted that R8 and R9 are not subject to public input per Bill 44. So R8, report from the Development Services Division regarding application number RZ24E01 3725 Glenora Road, PID 004928105.
Mr. Buchan.
Thank you, and if we could advance the next slide. This is also a reintroduction of an application you've seen before. This is to rezone the property at 3725 Glenora Road from P1, Parks and Institutional, to A1, Primary Agricultural. Just as a quick note here, the present zoning doesn't permit residential uses unless they're in conjunction with an institutional use, and the lands are also within the ALR, so institutional uses require a non-farm use. Next slide, please. So the property is located at 3725 Glenora Road and is wholly within the Agricultural Land Reserve. Next slide, please. The existing P1 zoning is due to its historic use as the Glenora Elementary School. And as previously noted, the P1 zone does not allow for a residence unless it is accessory to an institutional use, such as a school. Rezoning to A1, the primary agricultural designation, would be more consistent with the surrounding neighborhood and allow for a residence. Since the land is in the Agricultural Land Reserve, agriculture is already permitted on the property. Next slide, please. The application was referred to external agencies as well as the Advisory Planning Commission. The Advisory Planning Commission was supportive of the application. Cowichan Tribes had indicated that they would require more time to coordinate their review and response, and the Ministry of Agriculture has encouraged siting the residents within the existing footprint of the school building. Next slide, please. Staff have recommended that the draft zoning amendment bylaw be prepared and forwarded to the board for consideration of readings. The board has previously directed that a public hearing not be held and that notice be taken in accordance with the Local Government Act. And as Ms. Boyd has noted, there's also changes to Bill 44 that prevent the public hearing. I'm here for questions. I don't know if the agent is available, but I will be here.
Thank you, Mr. Buchan. Turn to directors. Any questions for staff? Can you lower your presentation, please? Director Dick.
Thank you. Thank you, Chair. I'm just wondering if Cowichan Tribes gave an indication about how much longer they would need in order to review it carefully.
Through the chair, we have not received an indication of time.
Okay. Thank you.
Look to directors. Any further questions for staff? Seeing none, turn to the director for the area.
I'd like to move the recommendation, please.
Moved and seconded. Ms. Boyd.
Thank you, Chair. The recommendation that it be recommended to the board that the draft zoning amendment bylaw for application number RZ 24E01, 3725 Glenora Road, PID 004928105 be prepared by staff and forwarded to the board for consideration of first, second, and third readings.
Seeing no other hands, call the question. All in favor? Any opposed? None opposed. Director Deck opposed? Motion carries.
Yes.
Motion carries. Thank you. Next item, Ms. Boyd.
Thank you, Chair. R9, report from the Development Services Division regarding application number RZ23G 012-11170 Branksome Road, PID 000433306.
Ms. DeBenna, welcome.
Thank you again, Chair. So this application is presented for a second time to the committee following referral responses, which are found in attachment B. No concerns were raised from referral responses. Just as a reminder, the application proposes to amend the Electoral Area G zoning bylaw to permit a 107 square meter detached suite and to reduce the minimum parcel size for subdivision. The detached suite is existing and would require a building permit to be reinstated as a residential dwelling. Staff consider the application to be generally consistent with the OCP policies for housing and aging in place and appears to be compatible with site conditions and the rural character of this area. While it's not within a growth containment boundary, the proposal is directing density where servicing is available in the community in Saltaire, which is currently only community water servicing. Staff are recommending the application proceed to bylaw drafting and are recommending requirements to be completed prior to adoption, which are listed in the staff report. I won't list them verbally. As a proposal would permit development that is whole or in part residential development and consistent with the OCP under the new legislation for Bill 44. The option to hold a public hearing is not available, and therefore public notices will be required. I can take questions.
Thank you. Can I ask staff to lower the presentation, please? Director Wilson, why don't you start us off?
Okie dokie. Thank you very much, Chair. One of the two mentions of septic report be prepared by a registered on-site wastewater practitioner or professional engineer. And then again, stormwater management plan by a professional engineer. Great idea. And these people are all very well qualified. One of the things that concerns me is that we get these reports, they're accepted, and then perhaps 6 months or a year later, they're then questioned or brought into question. Can we at least say, okay, we have a report, can we stop second guessing this in a year's time? How do we go about saying this is a report that we all accept and can't be questioned or won't be questioned in future? I know it's a tough one, that one, but I do hear over and over again, a year or two later, somebody brings into question the qualified engineer, his report, and that bothers me.
Ms. DeBenna, do you want to take that one, or should I kick it over to somebody at the side table?
I mean, oh boy. I could speak specifically for this application. When staff receive professional reports and read through them and not satisfied with those reports, they go back to them and ask them for clarification. Under the Development Approval Information Bylaw, we can ask for a third party if we're not satisfied with the renditions of these reports. In particular, in relation to the stormwater drainage, the idea would be that there would be a covenant registered on title. If they're not providing a stormwater management plan at this time, then the wording in the covenant would ask for one at the time of subdivision. Like if in some cases where we have received a stormwater management plan and it's attached to a covenant, the wording can be that the drainage that's actually installed meets or exceeds what was in that report. I don't disagree with you that we do get some funny historic reports. I'm not sure if I can stop that from happening, but we do go through them with a fine-tooth comb. I don't know if that helps at all.
It does, and if you wouldn't mind, Mr. Chair, if I could have a follow-up. Yeah, I understand. You study those reports very, very carefully when they come in, and you will go back to the engineers and say, what about this, that, and other. That's great. It's the ones that come back a year or 18 months later where somebody says, hang on, something wrong here. That's the kind of thing that does throw a spanner into the works. It certainly doesn't help with developers trying to build stuff in this area here.
I see Ms. Pressman coming forward, and I think I'll remark too that it's tough to handle, like when we get reports and through no fault of the applicants, they end up almost being stale dated, and then a weather event or something happens, and then, as you say, they're brought into question as to the veracity of their application. So I'm not sure that staff can help with that because it's a professional standard issue. But Ms. Pressman, have a go at it.
Mr. Chair, if I may clarify, it's not meant to be a mischievous question. I want this one to go forward. I do. I want all these developments to go forward. I just don't like to see these things coming forward later with second guessing kind of thing. Not by staff in most cases, by the way.
Help us out, Ms. Pressman.
Through the chair to Director Wilson, I'm not sure if I have much more to add about staff, but I'm just wondering if and wanted to comment that perhaps you're referring to situations where through the subdivision process, MODI has different requirements and may require different reports, and that has potentially, I know in the past has caused some delays, but that's something that's really out of our control with having a provincial approving officer and having MODI have different requirements that may change over time as well.
Any other questions for staff at this point? Looking on screen, Director McClinton.
Thank you, Chair. I'd like to move the staff recommendation. I'll speak to it if I get a seconder.
Moved and seconded, and I don't know if the applicants wanted to add something, but you're good? You're good? Okay. They're fine. Director McClinton, the floor is yours.
Oh, I love the floor. Thank you, Chair. Yeah, just happy to see this proposal go forward. Director Wilson, I think, this is a little bit more straightforward. It's sort of one parcel that's getting split in half, and there's going to be a family member moving into the cottage. So there is concerns about the older septic, but they'll get that checked out, and the stormwater should be fairly straightforward, I would imagine. So just some comments there, and just want to take a moment to thank the Area G APC, got together and had a great discussion about this proposal, and it was definitely helped me with my mindset moving forward. So yeah, happy to support this.
Thank you, Director McClinton. The resolution has been moved and seconded. Ms. Boyd, would you read it for us, please?
Thank you, Chair. That it be recommended to the board that the zoning amendment bylaw for application number RZ 23G011170, 3170 Bransom Road, PID 000433306 be prepared and forwarded to the board for consideration of first, second reading. That prior to consideration of adoption of the zoning amendment bylaw for application RZ 23G011170 Bransom Road, PID 000433306, a comprehensive septic report be prepared by the regional registered on-site wastewater practitioner or professional engineer that includes a site plan detailing the location of all underground wastewater infrastructure and certifies that the existing wastewater infrastructure is capable of supporting the dwellings in which they are intended to serve. B, that payment of a secondary suite capacity fee of $1,500 to the CVRD Utilities Division be received. 3, that prior to consideration of adoption of the zoning amendment bylaw for application number RZ 23G02111170 Branksome Road, PID 000433306, a covenant be registered requiring submission of a stormwater management plan by a professional engineer prior to subdivision and installation of on-site stormwater management infrastructure prior to construction. 4, that a public hearing not be held for application number RZ 23G011170 Branksome Road, PID 000433306, and that notice be undertaken under accordance with Section 467 of the Local Government Act.
Thank you, Ms. Boyd. Everybody clear on the recommendation? Resolution. Call the question. All in favor? Any opposed? None opposed. The motion carries. That too will go to the October 30th board meeting. Thank you, staff. Ms. Boyd, next item.
Thank you, Chair. We have no unfinished business, no new business, and we move to question period. Looking to the gallery, not seeing any public for question period. If you like, we can move to closed session.
Why don't we do that?
A motion that the meeting be closed to the public in accordance with the Community Charter, Part 4, Division 3, Section 90, subsections as noted in accordance with each agenda item. CSM 1, closed session Electoral Area Services Committee minutes of July 17th, 2024, and CSR 1, Law Enforcement subsection 1F and potential litigation sub 1G.
It's been moved. Seconded. All those in favor? Any opposed? None opposed. The motion carries. Do we want 5 minutes, or do we want to just bang right on here?
Someone back in again?
Pardon me? What can we do here?
5 minutes, please, Chair.
Okay, we'll take 7 minutes. Now, everybody back in the chair, ready to go at 3:40. Same, you don't have to sign out and sign back in. You can stay.